I'd like to welcome everybody here this afternoon to our third program of the day. And before we begin though, this of course is our celebration, our marking of Veterans Day. And we of course mean to, as others in our country here, mean to honor the veterans. Would all the veterans here today please just take a moment to stand up. And all these people, could we have a good round of applause and a thank you. You may be seated.
Didn't see a veteran of what?
Yeah, right.
The whole front.
Sick of kids.
The whole front. There you go.
70 years ago in December and January, 1944 and 45, the Battle of the Bulge took place. It was a grueling time. For Germany, for Nazi Germany, it was a last stand, you might say, a last big stand, and a push to try to, by Hitler, to separate the armies, try to gain some foothold and some ground, and turn things around. Fortunately, it did not happen. Today we have Battle of the Bulge, survival, we might say. But anyway, individual who lives in Shirley. And we have a person from Belgium who lived through that period as a youth growing up in a family as the Battle of the Bulge took place. So Joe Landry, would you like to step forth? And you're going to do the talking.
I'll stand over here.
In the background is Chris Demarcon, and he'll maybe put in his or two.
Well, as he said, my name is Joe Landry, and I live right here in the town of Shirley, born and brought up there. Excuse me. In 1943, my friends and neighbors called up and said, "We need your service," like they did for most veterans back then. I ended up coming here to Fort Devens, shipped out of here and went to Camp Davis outside of North Carolina. And they put us in an anti-aircraft outfit, which was the 776 AAA. We did all our basic training in the South. We went to Virginia, we went to the Blackstone Army Air Base, practicing defending the place. Then we went to West Point, did the same thing there. Then they shipped us back to North Carolina for a few more months. Then they shipped us to Camp Edwards down on the Cape. From there we got on a boat, went to Europe. We landed in Scotland. And from there we went shipped down to Plymouth Harbor, where we picked up all our equipment. And they, after about a month, they put us, a week rather, they activated us and planted the guns around Plymouth Harbor and a few other places to help shoot down German airplanes. From there we went to Omaha Beach on the 18th of July. We protected airfields, ammo dumps, and all that kind of stuff, all across Europe and up into Belgium and the Battle of the Bulge. I'll get to that a little later. And while we were set down, we put our guns down for a week, 2 weeks at a time. And General Patton didn't want any of his trucks idle. I happened to be a truck driver. So we got on what they call the Red Ball Express, delivered supplies all over Europe. The Red Ball itself only lasted about 2 months, but they had other truck routes, and whenever they needed troops moved, they called on us truck drivers. We hauled everything from the beach all the way up into the Battle of the Bulge and other places. And on the way back, we were carrying dead bodies in canvas bags back to places where they took care of them. And I'd like to read a note that I found in a magazine, and it's all about the Battle of the Bulge. And 70 years ago, on the 16th of December, 1944, Adolf Hitler summoned a group of his senior officers to a study in the huge underground bunker called the Wolf Lair. Hitler's secret field headquarters hidden deep underground in a pine forest in East Prussia. These summons were his closest and most trusted military advisors. Among them was only one who wore the red stripes of the German General Staff on his uniform. He was the head of the operations staff of the High Command of the Wehrmacht, General Alfred Joel. The officers were waiting when Hitler entered, taking his seat. Hitler instructed Joel to sum up the situation in the Western Front. Joel first noted that the strength of the opposing forces heavily favored the Western Allies. Over the past 3 months, the Germans had suffered more than 1 million casualties. Half of them had been in the West. Joel noted that there was one area of particular concern where the Americans were attached and where the Germans had almost no troops. That area was the region of Belgium and Luxembourg called the Ardennes Forest. At the words Ardennes, Hitler suddenly said, "Stop the briefing." There was a long pause. Silence permitted the room. The silence was broken when Hitler, reminiscent of his once moving and powerful rhetoric, said, "I have made a momentous decision." He boldly announced that it shall go on the offensive here, and he slapped his hand down on the map that laid across the desk. Here, out of the Ardennes, the objective is Antwerp. With those words, Hitler set in motion preparations for a battle that was to assume epic proportions, the greatest German attack in the West since the campaign of 1940. Hitler's daring, desperate plan was to penetrate the weakly held Ardennes, drive to the sea, splitting the British and American forces and capturing the crucial port of Antwerp. That's what Antwerp was where all the supplies were coming in to support the war. Hitler named the operation plan Watch on Rhine. He personally selected this name to imply a defensive operation rather than an offensive operation in order to deceive the Allies. During the planning, the German General Staff made numerous changes to Hitler's original concept for the operation. When the battle began, the German code name for the operation was Autumn Mist. A split second after 5:30 a.m. on Saturday, December 16th, an American soldier in the 28th Division, manning an observation post high on top of a water tower in the village of Holsinger, frantically turned a crank on his field telephone, which they have one in the museum, and reported to his company commander that in the distance on the German side he could see a strange phenomenon. Countless flickering pinpoints of light piercing the early morning fog and mist. Within a few seconds, both he and his company commander had an explanation. They were the muzzle flashes of over 2,000 German artillery pieces. The fog-shrouded stillness of the Ardennes forest was suddenly shattered with the thunderclap of an artillery barrage landing on the Americans. Operation was underway. The onslaught had begun. The Americans called it the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge lasted from the 16th of December, 1944, until the 28th of January, 1945. It was to become the greatest battle ever fought by the United States Army. But as most combat veterans know, any battle that you fought was a great battle. But this one was the largest in area and troops. More than 1 million men participated in this battle, including 600,000 Americans, 500,000 Germans, and 55,000 British. The American military forces consisted of 3 armies with the 33rd Division, while the German military force consisted of 2 Panzer armies with 29 divisions. More than 120,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or captured during the battle. Each side lost over 800 tanks. Wars are planned by old men in council rooms far from the battlefield. But at the end of the most grandiose plans of the biggest ranking generals is the soldier walking the point of manning the outposts. When
A couple of pages for me.
the real story of the Battle of the Bulge is the story of these soldiers and the intense combat action of the small units, the squads, the platoons, and the companies, and the soldiers who fill their ranks. For the most part, they were children of the 20s, citizen soldiers, drafted young men, hardly more than boys, called from across the land by their local draft boards with greetings. Most of you know about the draft board. Orders to report for induction. These are the men who made up the fighting strength of the divisions, carried out the orders of the generals, and engaged the Germans in mortal combat. Battalion commanders and company commanders, young leading through battle, wide and Cold War. And the second lieutenants, newly minted officers, and gentlemen, some still sporting peach fuzz on their upper lips, too young to require a razor. A grizzly NCO with face chisel and gaunt marred by the mud, sweat, and blood from cold, sleepless nights and the daunting stress of battle. And seasoned troopers, scoring and unkept, but battle-hardened, competed and disciplined in an automatic habit war never learned in school. And the green recruits, fresh off the ships from home, were rushed to the fields of battle and marched into combat for their baptism of fire. In their hearts was fear of the unknown. On their heads was the steel pot, around their necks hung their dog tags and rosaries. And in the pockets next to their hearts was a photograph, stained in yellow, the pictures of the girls they left behind. Surprising, stunned at not understanding what hit them, the American soldiers nevertheless held fast. They were as tenacious as junkyard dogs as they faced the mumbling horror of Nazi stormtroopers and their greatest following. By mammoth tanks, cranking and clashing towards them. Their fear cloaked in courage, in their eyes with the fire of determination. The battle was very personal for them. Concerned with the fearful, that consuming task of fighting and staying alive, these men did not think of the battle in terms of the big picture, represented on the situation maps in the war rooms by Eisenhower, Bradley, or Patton. They knew only what they could see and hear in the chaos of the battle around them. Their battlefield was the terrain within hand grenade range or the foxholes. They knew that and understood the earth for which they fought, the advantage of holding the high ground and the protection of the trench of foxholes. They could distinguish the sounds of German warfares. These were, I think it was 8 or 12 things in a rack, and they fired them one at a time, and it was a real deafening sound into the American lines. And the screaming sounds of incoming German 88s, and they knew the fear of having German artillery rounds falling like raindrops around them without patterns in the snow. And these pictures here of my outfit. We were formed here in Fort Devens and went to Europe as a unit, came back here in December of '45 and was discharged out of here. So I lived close by, and back then the government gave you transportation home, and they gave me 25 cents for taxi fare. But I ended up walking home because I only lived about a mile from here. So it was kind of funny. But I'd like to have my good friend, Mr. Chris Demarcon, get up and say a few words.
First and above all, I want to make sure that you understand that, yes, I am a veteran, but I never fought a day in my life. So I am no hero. But I want to thank all of you who fought, including Joe, of course, to liberate us. We were young Americans in Belgium at the time, and that was the only American citizen condemned to death by the Germans. And again, thanks to you people who came running into Belgium on September 3rd at a high rate of speed, you saved my dad, because the Germans, being very rigid in their ways, had indicated clearly that he was going to be executed the 13th of September, not the 12th, not the 14th, the 13th. Well, the Americans came, liberated Belgium, caught up with the train, saved my dad's life. He passed away at the good old age of 94 in Connecticut. So it's thanks to you people. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute, you're an American and you have this funny accent? And my friend, the reason I'm calling him a macaroni...
Are you German?
You must understand that the first time he saw me, he thought I was German. And of course, I'm sorry, but I hope none of you are born German. And I hope all of you are called Americans, because I look at myself and I say, I was born an American citizen, learned Dutch and French by law in Belgium, forbidden to speak English for 4.5 years. And yes, I do have an accent, but I am an American. I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not an independent, I am an American. And in Belgium, just to tell you, way before the war, if you remember history, the Italian army in Italy, not the Italians here, because I am an historian, and Joe can tell you, I have studied nearly all divisions, and I can tell you, the American Italians, they earned more medals than most people. They were very, very courageous and very good. However, in Italy, they tend to wait for the Germans to do all the dirty work, and then they come in at the last minute. So in Belgium, they say that the Italian army, they have a motto. It's fight and run away in order to be able to fight another day.
And make more wine.
So I call, and in Belgium, don't ask me why, in order to really be impolite, they call the Italian army a bunch of macaronis. Now, think that my dad left the business where he was taken by the German, never came home that night. He was weighing 184 pounds. When he came back, he was 109. So I would think that he was a little bit hungry. But he had asked mother for a pack of macaroni, which he never ate. He kept it hidden from the Germans. And the day the Italian capitulated during World War II, he cut the macaroni in little pieces. He gave it to all the prisoners. And at the roll call, all the prisoners had a piece of macaroni, and the Germans knew what it meant. They were really upset. It took them 3 days to find out who was responsible for it, and Dad got 3 days of what they call in German Dunkelcell, black cell. That means you were buried in the ground somewhere in a cell, and no food for 3 days, just water. So now I would like to back up on what Joe said, because here is the map of the Battle of the Bulge, and it's not very well clear, but the German crosses are here. That's where they bulged, they pushed. I decided to show you a little bit more in a better way. This is Belgium. Now, Belgium, you must understand, was created about the same time as the United States. So, why was it created? Because the Dutch, Holland is here, Germany is here, Luxembourg and France. The Dutch part of Belgium, they were Catholics, and they didn't get along with the Huguenots, and they wanted to separate. The French Catholics wanted to separate from France because of the revolution and all of that. So they got together, and you see this little line that I showed, that's the Dutch speaking, this is the French speaking, Walloon. Belgium is the size of Massachusetts plus 3 times Rhode Island. So it's a very small country. And there is, I try to reproduce the Bulge. And I am not politically correct. I don't care what the government says. The government is wrong. Because the Battle of the Bulge started on the 16th of December, yes. But they also pretend, the US government, that it ended on January 5th. It only ended when all the Germans were pushed back beyond the line that they started, and that was February 8th. So for me, I don't care what the government says. The battle was between December 16th and February 8th, 1945. So just to have an idea of what when Joe is talking, it was a very small country with a lot of soldiers in this area. It was the worst winter ever that Belgium ever had in 50 years. Cold, freezing cold, snow like no tomorrow. And these poor men, and some of you I'm sure remember that, in order to be able to have a nap, would hold on, 4 of them together, literally hold shoulder to shoulder, standing up, and putting their heads together and try to fall asleep for maybe 10 minutes at best, and then back to fighting. Many, and you remember that, many were with frozen feet, frozen hands, and many died. They were injured. They could have been saved, but we could not have enough medics to take care of them. And one thing that my wife and I have kind of specialized, we do a lot of work with the veterans of the Battle of the Bulge, but we kind of wanted to recognize 2 of the. We bought 158 books on the Battle of the Bulge, and not one shows the Were 11, the African Americans, nor ever show the women. These ladies in the, what they call them, now it's come. The closest in the battle were the medics. Those were men. Behind that, there was the nurses, but they were called evacuation hospitals. And then behind that was the general hospitals. And now, none of them ever mentioned what these people went through. I can tell you because I had some in our own little village of Paxton, Mass. We had one lady who never once, all through the war, slept in a building. She slept in a tent. The hospital was in a tent. They froze. So it was kind of unfair to think that, well, they didn't carry a weapon, therefore they were kind of forgotten. And so we have made an effort, and we're very proud, thanks to Joe and the team of Veteran of the Battle of the Bulge, we put up the only monument in the United States, in Winchendon, in the cemetery in Winchendon. And then, years later, because that was in 2006, now we get a call from, unbelievable, a lady at the State House. Her name is Sheila Harrington. Would you stand up, please? And thanks to Mrs. Harrington, she made sure to have all the support of the state and to have a rededication of the memorial in Winchendon, and it was fantastic. And even they tried to even get the lousy weather. We have even pouring rain, but it was super. I mean, and now these African Americans are being recognized more and more. In fact, maybe some of you have seen on channel, History Channel, there is a Were 11 special on the History Channel about these 11 men who were tortured. And there are too many ladies around in the room. I won't tell you what they did to them. It was terrible, terrible. So, is there something that you want to specifically say about the Battle of the Bulge? Yes, I know what I want to talk about. There. Thought it would be interesting for you to see, this is Massachusetts. And I tried to reproduce exact size the Battle of the Bulge on Massachusetts. So you can see it was a very small area. And now you're going to say, how come the Germans who were so powerful were able to do this? They caught us by surprise. The general, in fact, the Supreme Commander, Eisenhower, honestly thought that the war was over. They told the 106th Infantry, in fact, that, oh, fellows, you're going to go into this area, there's no problem, you don't have any ammunition, you don't need it. And by rule of the army, and I should know something, I'm an infantryman from the 9th Infantry, we have 5 miles, no more, to cover with the division. They had all the Battle of the Bulge, they had 3 or 4 divisions. They covered 25 miles each. It was ridiculous. They couldn't even holler to one another, the poor soldiers. Now, you're going to say, how come the Americans were... You must understand that in Germany, everything is rigid. You obey the officer. Now you kill an officer, oh boy, even the sergeant doesn't know what's going on. It's total chaos. That's why we lost so many officers, because they thought, stupidly, that if they shot the officer, well, that was the end of us. Well, there was a sergeant. Shoot the sergeant. There was a corporal. Shoot the corporal. They were always an American soldier ready to pull his team together. And I can tell you, there's a book on, he was the youngest lieutenant in the United States Army. Mr. Bulge was 18 years old. He was 14 years old when he joined. He was tall, he was looking like a man, but he was 14 when he joined. When he was in the Battle of the Bulge, he was company commander. And 18 men and himself held up a complete regiment of Germans. The 18 men, they all got badly banged and many killed. But why did they do that? Because again, in the United States, let's say, take a farmer. Well, he had to protect his land, so they had a 22, and they shot woodchucks. And the American, young American, had an old jalopy that they tinkered with and put back together. Everything was initiative by the good old Yankee ingenuity. While the German, the poor fellow, I don't like to even call it that poor because they deserve everything they got, but they didn't own, they were lucky to own a bicycle. Of course, a weapon was totally forbidden. So they had very little understanding of war. They were good soldiers. They would scream and holler and fight, but they were not using their head. Now, is there anything else that you want to? I don't want to talk too much here.
Feel free. Mr.
I-
Demarcon, Mr. Demarcon, I fell asleep drinking Italian wine with you one day, really, and you told me a story, seriously. You told me a story that your mother made an American flag.
Oh,
And-
okay,
and
all right.
What was that flag? I
Okay.
never got the end of that story.
Okay,
It's
okay.
nothing to do with the Battle of Bulge, but I want to know what it is before I die.
Okay, my dad was an American in Germany, in prison. My mother was Belgian. Now, we the children, call her later on our hero. But she was gone by that time because we did not know. We found out in her paperwork and souvenirs a certificate signed by the King of England with the medals. She was decorated in World War I for act of valor. She was born in 1903. The war ended in 18, so she was 15 years old maximum, whatever she did. We think that she probably was along a railroad somewhere and was keeping track of the German movement and feeding that back to the British, but she got a medal. Now, mother had been educated in England. She knew English very well. We had no dad, so he could not tell mother that, but mother was a very dedicated, very patriotic. I was born a Belgian. I love my 9 American children. I love my husband, but I cannot make that movement of becoming an American. So she never became an American, but she was very patriotic. So she decided she was going to make an American flag so that when the Americans would come and liberate us, there would be a flag on the house. She did not know. She knew there were 13 stripes. She knew there were 48 stars because Hawaii and Alaska were not. So she made a flag, which I'm going to ask Joe to hold up for you.
Oh, you actually bought the flag here.
And now,
You don't know the left from the right.
mother, we had a German guard in the house. And she would wait until we found out that, of course, after the war. We did not know that she made this flag. And she would wait for the guard to be asleep, and then she would pull her little singer sewing machine with the foot pedal, and she would make some part of it and then shove it back underneath the floor in her bedroom. Now, what's wrong? Those of you who know, don't please, but those of you who don't know me, what's wrong with this flag?
Stars are upside down.
The stars, exactly. Mother did not know. The only time the stars in the United States point down is on the Medal of Honor. But so here, it's really an exception. In fact, one day I was chastised when I went to school by a veteran. He said, "Well, you know, you should be ashamed to show something like this because it's really desecrating our flag." And I said, "Wait a minute, fellow. This flag was made by a Belgian to honor her husband who was in concentration camp and wanting to have an American flag flying on the house." So when did I find out about it? When we were told, or mother was told, the Americans are coming. Okay, so she come back to the house. Chris, you go in my bedroom, move this little piece of furniture, and move, there's a floorboard that's loose, and put the flag up. All right. Now, was it a half an hour? Was it 3/4? I don't know, but I can tell you, mother comes back. She was still looking for the Americans, and now she is total perspiration. Chris, take that flag down, quick! But luckily we lived in the woods, and our driveway was a little bit like this, so the German on the road could not see the house. And there were 3 German Panzer coming up. And literally, I'm not kidding, I have pictures. They ran out of fuel at the end of our driveway. And so they never saw it. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I did not fold that flag. It was rolled in a little ball and under the floor. And whew, because if the Germans had seen this, we would not be here to talk about it. So that is a little bit of the story of,
But that's not the story you told me. You told me there was a flag over the fireplace.
oh, that's a little one. I still have that one too. That one flew over the flyer.
Tell me.
Why it was there?
I wanna know that.
Because Dad had a flag flying in the only room that we could live in, because we had a wooden stove in the winter, and believe it or not, even the SS, when they came in and searched the house, they never took the flag down. I don't know, it was like something that they could not do. I still don't know. And that little flag was over on the chimney, over the wood stove, and it fluttered all through the winter with the heat. And so it is tattered, I mean, it's broken, and I still have it in a frame. That's the story of that little flag. But that one was small.
The SS didn't take it down?
No, they respected the American flag.
Wow.
They
No.
respected it?
Yes.
Wow.
But mind you, you have to understand the Germans. They're very good engineers, but they cannot use their head. That is one thing, they're so regimented. For instance, one of the scariest things for us kids is to wake up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning with an SS standing there in bed with a pistol at your head. Raus, raus. And they would take us all out, put us in that one room, and then they checked to see the number of warm beds. And then they would count the number of heads. And if you had one warm bed more than the heads, they would take the house down to find out. Well, every time we hit American, they would only stay one day to go further and down to France and Portugal, Spain and Portugal. And so these men never slept in a bed. And Dad had built a chute on the 4th floor in the rafters, and they never caught them because they never came with dogs. But otherwise, they would question and harass the living life out of us, because they knew there was something going on, but they couldn't, and Mother was still involved with the underground. So, I'm sure you must have some question for Joe.
Could you tell the story about being in church?
Oh, that's emotional. In the sense that, you see, when the Germans were winning, they were doing well, they had no problem of having Americans die in camp. Now, they never tortured the Americans. They were afraid of that. But they let them die of hunger. And the younger Americans usually died first because they needed the energy. Dad was an older man. He married at age 37, and I'm the oldest of 9, so, and I was born in 28. So I'm 86 years old. But, so they didn't care. Okay, you die, you die. But then when the Americans started winning, they had acquired, liberated northern Africa, and now they were winning in Italy. They decided, oh, dangerous. We might have reprisal when an American. So Dr. Bobea, the doctor who was a prisoner, said to Dad, look, Gus, the next time I hear that the Germans are going to have a medical, I'll tell you in advance, you don't drink. And it's going to be excruciating, but your last drop of urine will show that you had a kidney removed in 36. Now you had only one kidney left. That kidney now is gone. And they will probably send you home to die. So we don't know this, of course. And in Belgium, we don't have benches in churches like here in the States. We have individual chairs, or at least they had that in those days. And due to respect, and more of them were women, because the Belgian men were all taken to Germany, but the Belgian women were very patriotic, and still are very patriotic, and would try to save Americans, and they got caught and in prison. And now, the seat in church of he or she who was gone in Germany was kept open. That was respect. Now, we're all in church, the seat, Dad, Mother, And some of us, not all of us, because they were too young, we lived a mile from the church, and it was in the fall, early November, and it was cold, and so we were in church. And now this dad was pleasantly plump, clean shaved, the last time we saw him, and this hobo looking like a beggar, with dirty clothes, a beard, hunched like this, skinny, and he sat down next to Mother. Of course, Mother is not going to go and say, hey, who are you? She's looking at the altar. But us kids, we were here, and we, what on earth is going on? Why? There's plenty of seats. Why is this beggar sitting next to Mother? Well, they always talk English among themselves. And he took, within 30 seconds, he took his elbow, shoved it into Mother's ribs and said, are you going to kiss me? And he said it out loud. It was Dad. I mean, she finally recognized it was her husband. I'll tell you, there was a little bit of disturbance in the church. So that's what...
Can I ask Joe a question, Mr. Demarcon?
I'm gone.
Joe,
You're alive.
what is the, what would you, can you estimate and remember, what was the length of your mission on one day? If you started your truck with a load of ammunition or fuel, how was it, a 5-hour drive back and forth, or 3 hours, or 4 minutes?
Sometimes it was 24 hours.
Straight driving?
Yeah,
Oh,
but most of the times we had two drivers, an assistant driver and a driver. And sometimes we were in a hurry and we'd change drivers without stopping. One guy would pull up close to the steering wheel, and the other guy would slide behind him, and we'd switch and keep on going. But the majority of the trips were 8 or 10 hours one way, and on the way back we'd stop in a quartermaster outfit and get something to eat and go on our way.
so the stops were important.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
I can
the
imagine.
biggest problem the Red Ball had was tires. For all the shrapnel and everything that was on the road, we kept puncturing tires. So tires became a real problem. And at times we only had, on a 6x6, which had 10 tires, we sometimes only had 6 tires. And you had to be careful what you were carrying, but the particular truck that I drove was a 2.5-ton Jimmy, which is over there. And it was rated for 2.5 ton, but most of the times we were well overloaded,
That's not me.
especially when we were hauling petroleum products. It all came in 5-gallon cans. And we'd line them up on the bed, lay 2 down, and then line up another rack on top for the whole length of the bed. So we had quite a load. Then they'd stick a 1-ton trailer on behind and loaded the same way. So the trucks were overworked all the time, had a lot of problems. I was very lucky, but being a mechanic before I went into service, I took care of my truck. That was my
Baby.
lifesaver. And I made sure the gas and the oil and everything was up to par.
When you were driving up,
Driving
were there other trucks coming back down?
both ways.
Was that was a big problem, was it, or did you have to?
The Red Ball Express, the MPs control the highways, and we had a red sign on the front of our truck that indicated you were on the Red Ball Express. And French, nobody else was allowed on that road but us. And we had one-way traffic to the front lines, one way back to wherever you were going. And at one time during the Bulge, it was so muddy and icy that a few of us, in order to get through the stuff, put dual wheels on the front. And if you can imagine, without power steering, trying to steer a truck with dual wheels on the front was almost impossible.
I bet you could still drive it today.
Yeah, and when the Battle of the Bulge started, my outfit was stationed around a place called Nancy, France. And they got a call for all trucks to report to a certain area. And we helped move the 101st and the 82nd Airborne up into the Battle of the Bulge. We got in within about 4 miles of the front lines and stopped and kicked them all out. Not really, but they got out and they walked the rest of the way into Bastogne.
I have had the honor and the privilege to be able to work with Joe Landry and Christian Demarcon and a few others over this past year. And their dedication to the memory of those that fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and their dedication to the Wereth 11, which they started to tell that story. And I would have to say that story astonished so many people in the state. Secretary of Veterans Affairs was really unaware of it. There were a VFW post in Boston that was largely African American that were somewhat aware of it, but not aware of the work that they had done. And really, I mean, you're right. He won't brag or toot his own horn either if you try to beat it out of him. But really, all of that memory that you guys put together, if you had not initiated and really tried to work to put both the memorial to the Battle of the Bulge veterans and the memorial to the Wereth 11, I don't think that their memory would be honored in the United States as the way that we hoped to do in that rededication ceremony. Still not enough, obviously still not enough, that we will have to continue to always remember and do more. But I am proud that it's people from our area of Massachusetts that took it upon themselves to do this. The only memorial in the United States, actually, to the Wereth 11 has been put there by Mr. Demarcon and Mr. Landry and others. And I actually felt so proud to be able to work with them on it. And we are going to be meeting on Tuesday on the 11th day at the 11th hour of the 11th month at Holy Cross, College of the Holy Cross, where the Central Massachusetts veterans of the Battle of the Bulge will have a commemoration that day for the 70th anniversary of this extraordinary battle. And I'm going to be honored to be there with them again. So I'm glad everybody was here to hear their stories. They've certainly blown me away over the last year or so. So I'm proud to know both of them and call them a friend. So thank you, guys.
I want to thank this lady because basically this could not have been done without the state rep, who really went out of her way to pull everybody in Boston, and it was fantastic. And then I think I would be remiss to say, when I'm 86 years old, I was very, very lucky. I married a Belgian. Her uncle and godfather was Belgium ambassador to Washington during World War I. So we had some ties there. And she has been unbelievably supportive of the work that we have been doing. And when I say unbelievable, this fellow was poisoned during the war, high school dropout, and I went back, thanks to her, to high school in Boston at age 28. So, and I went there, from there to Tufts University, and it's thanks to her. And I hope one day you meet this charming lady that I call my wife. In 3 months from now, it'll be 60 years.
Thank you all for coming, and hope we didn't bore you.